Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's October. It's Reuse Month. This is a first live virtual workshop, and I am delighted to welcome everybody today. My name's Ed. I'm from the Reuse Month team, bringing you Reuse Month this year, and we've got a really exciting workshop ahead. This is a masterclass in fashion design, in sustainable fashion design, and we're going to get straight into it. We've got lots of comments coming in already on our YouTube channel, which is fantastic to see. Such a great turnout. Thanks everybody for coming here today, and please keep those comments coming in. If you have any questions throughout the session, I'm going to pop in every so often just to relay that question. So please feel free to send in as many questions as you can, and we'll answer as many as we can. But look, before we kick off, this is a very special flagship event presented by the Connacht-Ulster Regional Waste Management Office, and I would like to invite Sinead Niwanin, who is the Waste Prevention and Resource Efficiency Officer from Connacht-Ulster Region, to welcome everybody. So welcome to Sinead.
Thank you, Ed, and good afternoon, everybody. You're all so very welcome to the Connacht-Ulster Reuse Fashion Masterclass. We're delighted to have you with us today. As Ed said, my name is Sinead Niwanin, and on behalf of the 3 regional waste management offices, I'm delighted to welcome you to our first virtual event of Reuse Month 2021. So as many of you will know, October is Ireland's National Reuse Month, and this is just a wonderful opportunity for us to draw attention to reuse and the importance of reuse. So for us, reuse really is about valuing our belongings by reusing and using items for as long and as often as possible. And then this, of course, avoids the need to manufacture and distribute new stuff, thereby cutting down on and avoiding waste, which is really what we all want to do and want to achieve. So with that in mind, today's masterclass is going to show you how to deconstruct a garment to maximize its reuse possibilities. The masterclass will also show you how to alter items so you can reuse an item in another form. And also, really importantly, the masterclass will show you how to make a pattern from an existing piece of clothing, maybe a piece of clothing that you love yourself. So lots and lots to look forward to today over the next hour and a half. So just, I suppose, before I pass you on back to Ed, I'd really just like to say again, taking the opportunity just to thank you for taking the time out of your own busy schedule to join us. I hope you'll enjoy the workshop. I have no doubt but that you'll find it of value, and I really look forward to hearing your feedback in due course. So thanks again for being with us. Enjoy the event, and back to you, Ed.
Thank you very much, Sinead. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And so now let's hand you over to the masterclass host herself. She is the program manager for Rediscover Fashion at Rediscovery Centre, and we're going to beam her in live now. So, Arran, can you hear us?
Hello there. How's it going, everybody?
Hi, Arran.
Nice to meet.
Sorry, yeah, Arran. I'll hand over to you now, and I'll pop up. We've got a second camera there as well for any of the close-up work that you want us to see. I'll go into the background now, Arran. I'll hand over to you to take over. We're all very excited to take part in this masterclass today, and I'll jump back in if there's any questions for you. Okay, I'll give you as much time to talk as possible, and then I'll jump in if there's any questions. Okay, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks very much. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the comments, and Ed will hopefully feed them through to me. Thank you very much for all joining us. My name is Arran Murphy. I'm the Rediscover Fashion Program Manager, and I'm delighted to be joining you from the Rediscovery Centre here in Ballymun, from our dedicated sustainable fashion studio. It's amazing to see so many of you here. It's really a sure sign of the rising awareness around the issues of the fashion industry in particular, and the need for us all to adopt more reuse and repurposing practices in order to extend the lifespan of our clothing. And this, as Sinead said, will help reduce the amount of clothing that is actually being produced, which is a phenomenal amount at the moment. There's like over 400% more clothing being produced now than there was 20 years ago. So this is something that really needs to change. And as we're becoming more aware of the impacts of the fashion industry, environmentally, socially, and economically. We're also becoming more aware of the various stages that a garment and our textiles go through it before and after they're with us in our wardrobes. And as we're kind of gaining this awareness, we're also gaining awareness of the problems at each of these stages. And it can be a bit overwhelming when we're and hard to relate to, in fact, when we're presented with these awful figures of the fashion industry being the second biggest polluter in the world, contributing to 10% of the global greenhouse gases, things like that. It's like, oh, but you know, I'm just wearing my clothes. What can I do? But actually, there's a certain chapter of our clothing life story that we do have a big impact on, and that's our choice to, like, our consumer choice to actually buy the garments, and then what happens to them when we no longer want them. So Reuse Month is a really great initiative that's helping us to kind of focus on that chapter of all of our belongings. And I'm delighted to be presenting this fashion design reuse masterclass to hopefully inspire you and help you with future projects. So we're going to look at a few different things today. And the first one I wanted to start with is how to deconstruct a garment so that you're actually maximizing the potential reuse of that garment. And this is a kind of an interesting process, because what you're doing is actually looking at the garment and looking at the construction that's already gone into it, and seeing what are the useful elements of it. So for example, with this shirt, there is a big body of fabric at the back here, which I actually took out to use for this bag as the lining. So I don't know if you want to show that in the close-up. So you can see I really liked the fabric of that, matched the denim very well. So I used the big body of fabric from the shirt for the lining there. But I did it very carefully by cutting out along the seams and leaving the rest of the shirt intact. It's a really useful approach, and it's a really kind of a key mind shift, I guess, in the whole idea of reuse and repurposing, is to be looking at what we already have and seeing what we can use it for, and using what we already have as the inspiration for our projects. So it's just a little shift, but actually has big impacts. And I guess it's the whole thing about reuse and repurposing is realizing that every little thing that we do does actually feed towards a greater movement and is worthwhile. So every little choice, every little attempt and effort towards reuse and extending the lifespan of our clothing and diverting it from landfill, which is the big thing, and bringing it back into the production cycle and using it as a resource rather than something that's useless, seeing the use that's in it. So for instance, with a shirt, we can look at the various elements like the cuffs. These are finished pieces that are really useful, and the collars and the button plackets here as well. We can take them off, and you can actually cut them and leave a bit of a seam allowance depending on what your project is going to be. You can leave a bit of a seam allowance, so cut them off. I'll just do a quick example. I can do this by eye because I've been doing it by eye for so long, roughly, but you might need to measure it and mark it yourselves. So I just want to cut it off to show you, for example. So I've cut that off. You can see in the close-up. Need to get used to the angle. And I will be able to sew that onto the bottom of a cuff, of a sleeve, to use as the bottom cuff again. Or the same is possible with the collar. You can cut them off with the seam allowance so that you can sew it onto something else, or you can cut them off just on their own. And if you can see the mannequin beside me, I'll take the bag off so you can see it. I've actually used the cuffs of this shirt as a design feature at the bottom of the shirt. The same in this one. I've used the collar. I've put it back onto the neckline, but it created this really nice asymmetrical kind of neckline design feature. using the collar. Likewise, we were able to unpick the pockets using a stitch ripper, and it can take a bit of time to actually deconstruct a garment in the best way possible. But if you think about it, you're honoring in this way the amount of work that's already gone into creating that garment. And it's funny, once you begin looking at your clothing in this kind of way, you begin to appreciate more and more the amount of work that has gone into making them, and it becomes, you kind of see the value of that rather than it just being a shirt that you have no connection to. You kind of actually delve a bit deeper into it and start relating to it in a different way and regarding it differently, which is a huge shift and a hugely important shift to make. So like with the, sorry, I just got the jeans bag again. So the same can be said for the jeans, the tops of a pair of jeans. Very useful resource to have. It can be turned into many things. For example, sorry, I have all of these examples behind me and around me. Skirts, we can make jeans into skirts, and you're using the finished waistline and waistband, so if it actually fits you quite well still, but the trousers part of it, the legs are really worn out. Sometimes it happens with stretch jeans that actually they've stretched kind of beyond wearable state. Or you can use them for the top of a bag. So yeah, so that is looking at your garments. So then, for example, with the jeans, so we're using the top for the top of a skirt, but we can use then the legs as part of, for many other projects. For example, this draft excluder, made simply by sewing two ends at the end of a pair of jeans and stuffing inside. So that's a really quick project that you can do. Likewise with any of the scraps, we can do, particularly with jeans, because denim is such a hard wearing fabric, so you can create your own patches to sew onto jeans to repair holes or jackets or anything like that. Little projects, like there's so many things you can do once you kind of get into it. I like this little bunting project as well. You can do the scraps of it. So yeah, it's all about looking at the garments that you're using and having in mind the project that you want to achieve with them, and seeing what elements already exist that you can use for that project. So for example, the jeans, you can use the waistband, and something then that you kind of run into is that if you're fitting two garments together, for example, with these t-shirt shirt upcycles, we're oftentimes needing to fit a wider piece of fabric into a smaller piece of fabric. And there are various different ways that you can do that. So with this one and with this one, I've used a gathering technique. So for any of you who aren't accustomed to that, the way that you do that is with your piece, you'll measure it out up to twice the length of the piece you're trying to fit it into. So for example, the jeans is 40 centimeters. So that would be 80 centimeters the whole way around. So the strip that I cut could be anywhere between 160 centimeters to 120 centimeters, depending on the gather that you want to get. So then you would sew the top with a double stitch line. And this is probably the only time that you will not do your securing stitches, your back stitch at the beginning and at the end of your line of stitching. And you want to sew your two lines so that they're parallel to each other and not crossing over each other. And what you will do is tie the two bottom. So at one end, you're going to tie the two bottom or the two top threads together. So And that's to prevent you pulling the threads actually the whole way out. And then with the other end, with the same, either the top or the bottom, you're going to pull the fabric along them. And we use 2 threads because it's quite easy for the thread to snap, but if you have 2, it gives it a bit more strength. And you just ease it gently along until you get it to the measurement that you want it to be. And you're trying all the time to try and get the gather as evenly along, as even as possible. So you don't want it to be all gathered here and just straight here. You want to ease it. So you're sharing there all the way around. Another way you can do, if you're trying to fit one piece in to another piece, so we can use pleats. So again, you would get your measurement. So that's 40, and you would get the measurement, for example, with the shirts. If it was 10 centimeters bigger, that means that we need to take it in by 10 centimeters. So we create pleats. Folding, I don't know if you can see that. I'll move myself a little bit. So, for example, if you needed to take your garment in by 10 centimeters and you wanted to create 2 pleats at the front and 2 pleats at the back, you'd be dividing your 10 centimeters into 4, which is 2.5, and you'd be creating pleats that were 2.5 centimeters in total each. So 1.25 centimeters. There's a lot of maths comes into when you're doing these kind of projects, because you're trying to create the same look on your right side and your left side, and kind of mirror that in the front and the back. So it's handy to have a sheet of paper to do your little calculations beside you as you're doing that. Another way you can fit a bigger piece into a smaller piece is by actually altering the side seams. So I have this example here, where I've drawn in. So let me see. This as well might make it easier for you to look at it. So I need to fit my shirt into the same width as my t-shirt. And again, you're going to measure. So that is 45, and this is 56. So that's 11. So I need to take this in by 11 centimeters. So I'm going to divide that in 2 and take the same amount in either side. So it'll be 5.5 centimeters. I'm going to move myself again so you can see me in the close-up what I'm doing. So I measure in 5.5 centimeters, and you can mark it with your tailor's chalk, or you can mark it with a pencil or a coloring pencil if you don't have those things to hand. And there's a certain amount of specialized tools that you can get for these kind of projects, but you can also use what you have at home to a great extent. Like if you don't have a set square, you can use so this is my set square. You can use an A4 sheet of paper just to get the corner, the right angle. Likewise, if you don't have a ruler, you can use a measuring tape like this, and just make sure it's lying out flat, or you can use the side of a book, just as long as you know it's got a straight line. You can be a bit of a MacGyver on it. So then when you are taking this, so I'm going to take it in, mark in 5.5 centimeters at the top. And I want to bring this new line down to meet the already existing stitch line. And this is something that you might do for other alterations. It's a method that you might use for other alterations if you wanted to take something in at the side seam. You would measure down and taper your line very gradually towards the line, because you don't want it to come at an angle, too great of an angle. It would have a really funny shape then when you turn it the right way around. So all the time we're working on the inside of the fabric here, because this is where we'll be doing our stitch line. So we've turned our garments inside out. So if I measure down there and the line that I've marked that I'm happy with meets the stitch line at 26 centimeters. And that's an important measurement to take, because I want to replicate the same line on the other side. So all the time we're kind of dealing with symmetry when we're making our garments or doing these kind of projects. So you mark in 5.5 on this side as well. And then from that mark, you will bring measuring tape down to 26 centimeters so that it's meeting at the same place. And you'll draw your line in there so that you're actually replicating the same line. If you can see that. So that's a really good way to alteration that you're doing. Another really good tip for joining two together is to create knots. And this will help us line up your fronts and the center backs and make sure that they're sitting nicely together.
Sorry, guys, I think we just lost sound there. Small technical difficulties as it happens when you're doing live broadcasts. Just bear with us for 2 seconds. We'll just get the sound working again and straight back to you. Don't go anywhere. Is your sound back, Arran?
Am I back? I should go ahead. Am I back? Okay, cool. I've been given the all clear. I think you can hear me. So where was I? Very sorry about that delay. Can I take these out? Okay, I'm just going to take these ones out so I can. So where was I? Very sorry about that delay. So we were at the point where I was showing you how to do the notches, and that was something that I wanted to show you because that's an important thing to mark on your project and on your fabric and on your textiles with any project, because the notches will show you where you want to, where your pieces should join together. So the side seams are a natural kind of marker for the side seams should line up. The center front and the center back don't have any marking on them like that. So it's a good idea to mark them in before you pin your pieces together. And the way that you do that is you line up your side seams. I've pinned them in place. Can you see that? I pinned my side seams in place there. And I'm just going to fold out my piece, my t-shirt here. So I've got the front and the back folded out like this. And I'm going to do a little snip just there. And that's my notch. So it's only 0.5 centimeter. You don't want to make it longer because you'll cut into the seam allowance and you're in danger of cutting past the seam allowance, which will be visible on the outside of your fabric. So you want to do that at the front and the back. And you'll do that for your the other piece as well. So you'll know, I have one I prepared earlier, I'll get it. So you'll know how to pin them together. You'll match up the front notch and the back notch. When you're pinning them together, you want to pin them together with the right sides facing. That's a common term, right sides and wrong sides, referring to the right side is the outside of your garment and the wrong side is the inside of your garment. So right sides facing. So I'm going to put that in there. And you can see it can be a bit of a jumble when you have a lot of fabric in the mix. So finding your notches and knowing that that's definitely needs to be lined up is a good idea. So I'm going to match up my side seams. And once you have them all in place, you would be stitching that all around. And this particular project is on its way to become this. So you can see the kind of tapered A-line effect here. And this one I really like because I really like the collar feature on this one. And when you're adding something onto, it's a really good thing to do is to add something onto the neckline or onto the sleeves of a t-shirt because it really brings it into a different look and it brings it away from being a t-shirt. Whereas it's really good to use t-shirts as well because you don't have to deal with putting darts in or anything like that. It'll just stretch kind of comfortably over your body curves, but you can bring it away from that t-shirt look by adding onto the sleeves and onto the neckline. It's a really effective way of doing things. And this type of project in particular is quite it's an easy one. You do need some skills, but it's relatively easy, particularly because of that. You don't need to worry about the darts or anything like that, or how it's going to close. So you don't need to put in a zip or worry about buttons or anything like that because it just stretches over your head. One thing to be aware of if you are adding to the neckline, that you don't want to compromise the stretch that it needs to be able to go over your head. So for this one, even though this is not going to stretch here, I've left this open so that it will still fit over your head. There was one other thing I wanted to show you before moving on, and that was just the using a jumper. So again, just looking at the elements that are the finished elements that are in your garments and using them for your projects. So for example, here we have the bottom of your jumper is actually turned into the bottom of your hat. And likewise, it could be the top of your mittens, if you're making mittens. And this is one of my favorite ones. It's a hooded scarf made from a jumper where you're using actually the sleeves as the scarf part. And yeah, that's a really quick and easy, nice project to do. So that's all around kind of looking at the garments that you're using, and it will change with depending on what garments you're using, because obviously different garments and textiles have different potential in them. So it really will depend. But like, this is an example of the belt from a dress. So all of the elements are worth keeping, even if you're not going to use them for this particular project. For a future project, you might be like, I know what I can do. So for example, this is using the gathered stitch to create a ruffle from a belt. So the belt itself was completely a finished piece on its own, and simply by adding a gathered stitch into the center of it, I was able to create a ruffle that I was able to then place and sew in place on this vest to kind of bring it into, revamp it a bit. So yeah.
Hey Arran, can you hear me?
Reusing.
Arran?
The finished elements. Sorry, Ed, is there a question?
Yeah, just Thomas asked, is that a half collar you used on the t-shirt?
Is it a half collar? No, the collar goes the whole way around. But it's placed, it's a whole collar, but it's placed asymmetrically. And because the collar is already cut kind of to go around a neckline, it's really good at curving around that part of it. That's something that we're going to get into, the bias. So anything that is curved, like around a neck, we'll be using a thing called the bias of the fabric, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. But the bias will allow a certain amount of stretch in fabric. I might as well get into it now, seeing as I'm here. So the bias, if you think about how a piece of fabric is made, it's a woven thread, woven threads woven in a grid together. So we have the straight of grain, which is all of the threads that are going straight down the roll of fabric. And then the bias is actually on the diagonal of that. So the straight of grain won't stretch, and the bias that's going on the diagonal will have a little bit of give in it. So we use that to go around any curves. So that would be used in the construction of the neckline here, and that's why it's easy to use the collar to go around the curve of that neckline. Something to keep in mind. You'll come across it more and more, I'm sure. Okay, so the next element is that I wanted to show you is this idea of this is a kind of fun thing that you can do. So this is a total reimagining where then the collar has been used for the sleeve. So the shirt has been turned on its side, and the button placket is used as the neckline. The shirt collar is used as the sleeve, and another sleeve is being created here from the bottom of the shirt. So these are all finished edges that have been kept intact. Then the back of it has been opened, and at the back, the sleeves have been, and at the front, the sleeves have been added down the bottom, again intact. So actually you can put your hand in there. And that's kind of creating the bottom, the finish line here. This element here has been, so it's using the method of kind of draping. So you can either, if you have a mannequin, you can do this on a mannequin, and it can be fun to just, pin things in place and see what they look like. And if you don't have a mannequin, it can be fun to do it just on yourself, just looking at a mirror and just pin things into place a little bit. Or if you are looking in a mirror and you want to try it on, if you use a safety pins, then you can actually take them on and off without being in danger of scraping yourself with the pins. So it can be a really nice kind of exploration that you can do. You can have a bit of fun creating something. This works for this kind of a look because it's quite loose. It's you know, slightly androgynous look to it. It's not very shaped or anything. So it can be a bit of fun to explore that and then just stitch anything that you're happy with in place. But yeah, once you start looking at your textiles and your clothing with this different kind of eye, really your imagination can take you anywhere. So that's a really good thing. So then,
Arran, we have another question there, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Sharon asked, how do you stop knitted items unraveling?
If you have cut your jumper at all, by stitching them, like stitching a line in them, it stops them unraveling. So for example, with this one that has a line of stitching in it, just across there, and it will unravel a little bit, but it will stop there. If you're more concerned, you can also do like a zigzag stitch on it with the sewing machine. If you have an overlocker, that's brilliant for finishing the raw edges. But yeah, if you basically stitch it, it will stop the unraveling past the stitch line. Hope that helps. So, any other questions to that point?
Not at the moment, thanks, Arran.
Not at the moment. Okay, great. So I'm going to move on then to the whole idea of using a garment to create a pattern. So a lot of us will have, you know, favorite garments, and it's a really good way to combat the really fast changing trends of of fast fashion. Basically, is by slowing it down. If you have something that you really love, that you really feel, you know, that you feel great in, that you like the look of, whether or not it's, you know, getting worn out, you might just want the same thing in another color, or in a different fabric. This is a really good method to learn. And I am going to use this top to show you how to do that. So again, you're looking at the construction of the garment that you want to make a pattern from, and seeing how many pieces were used to put it together. So for this one, we have a front panel, we have two side panels, and we have two back panels because there's a fastening, a button fastening at the top here, and there's a center back seam down here in order to be able to create that opening. So that can be the case if there's like a zip, or with any kind of fastening, there'll generally be two center back seams so that you can put the fastening or the zip in. We then also have these frills or flounces. So I'm going to show you how to make a pattern from them. I'm going to keep an eye on the time, so I mightn't get all of the patterns pieces made for this, but I'll certainly show you how to do the method. I'll get to show you that. So when we're making a pattern from a garment, it's important to keep in mind that the pieces once were a flat piece of fabric, and now they've been cut and sewn together. So now they're trying to get a 3D thing back into a 2D form. So it can be a little bit tricky, and just can require a little bit of is the idea of creating symmetrical pieces. So we generally, unless it's a particularly specific asymmetrical piece, we generally will want the right side and the left side to be identical. And the best way to do this is to cut them on a piece of folded fabric. So for a piece like this center front, we'll fold it in half. And the fold, it will be cut on the fold. So the pattern piece will be placed exactly on the fold, so that when we cut it out, it's going to open out and be the full front panel, identical on the left and the right. For the other pieces, we're going to cut them on the double. So that's a really good way of making sure that we're cutting out the mirror image. So a left side and a right side, or the way around, and not two right sides, because we'll be cutting them out at the same time. Okay, so I'll go ahead and show you the method. So first of all, we are going to fold this in half. And the way that we do that is, again, lining up the seams. So I'm lining up the shoulder seams, and I'm going to pin them in place. So we're trying to draw the outline of these pieces. So I'm going to fold this, lining up all of the seams that you can. So all the shoulder seams, the side seams, and just pinning them together. And that's the way that you can make sure that you're getting this piece folded in the center, along the center front line. And it can be interesting actually when you start doing this, because you can discover that your pieces haven't actually been made as well as you would have hoped. So you may need things you might find. So I'm going to go under here and make sure that the side seams are meeting nicely. Pin them together. Keep an eye on the angle that I'm not moving out of view, but I think that's good. So once I'm happy with that, what I'm going to do is actually draw a line, a straight line. And I'm going to line up my center fold with that line and pin it in place, top and bottom. So I'm pinning it into the paper. I'm going to take I've got 2 layers of paper here. I'm going to have to take the under one out. Bear with me. You've got good quality pins, they don't snap. So there we are, started. Okay, pin that in place there. Making sure it's folded all the time, that your piece, the panel that you're actually making the pattern from, doesn't matter about the rest of it, but the panel that you're actually making the pattern from is sitting nice and flat and isn't stretched, because you want to be getting the actual shape of it. Pin that in place there. And also along here, because you don't want it to move out of place as you're getting the side seam here. And you can use this method for anything. Just get the pattern from anything. Sleeves are a little bit more tricky, but absolutely possible using the same method. And darts can be a little bit tricky as well, but there's also a method to do that. So you really can replicate your favorite garment. I'm going to pin the bottom here because it's important. This fabric is a little bit slippy, so it's important that it doesn't move out.
Can I pop in with a quick question?
Sorry, Ed.
Can I pop in with a question? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So from Angela, she asked, are you using a special type of paper to draw the pattern on?
This is just a light, it's a pattern drafting paper, but if you don't have that at home, you can use baking paper. So just grease-proof paper. That's what if I don't have access to this, that's what I would use. And it's really good because a commercial pattern is made on a very thin paper. It's kind of almost like tissue. So it moves with the fabric quite easily and it's easy to pin. The normal A4 paper would be a little bit heavy to get the pins through. So the greaseproof paper is actually perfect. That's a great question. It's really important to know that actually, you might need a few bits of equipment to do these types of projects, but you don't need everything. And there's things that you can replace but with household items that will get you the desired effect. So just pinning this in place all the way along. And I'm going to just trace around it. So the bottom is easy enough. And it's just to keep in mind at the bottom of a garment usually has a hem. So I can feel on this one, there's a 2.5 centimeter hem. So I'm going to add that onto the bottom after I've taken the garment off. Now you can see I'm kind of maneuvering my garment so that I can reveal the stitch line at the side seam. And I want to draw that stitch line onto my paper. So we're drawing the outline of each panel and we're going to add seam allowance onto it after we take the garment off. That's why it's important to be really happy with the way that you've pinned it onto the paper, that it's sitting nice and flat and in a kind of relaxed manner, that it's not being stretched. Or pulled out of place.
Arran, we have another question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Breed asks, is it vital to use similar material for the new top so it drapes in the same way?
That's another very good question. Yes. If you're going for the same look, it's a good idea because things will hang in a way. Like this is quite a loose fabric. Sorry, I'm shaking the camera there. So if I made this with a stiff cotton, it wouldn't have the same look. It might be interesting. And you might like it for different reasons, but it definitely wouldn't hang in the same way. So yes, if you're going for the same look, it's a good idea to get something that's similar weight, similar thickness, and a similar structure. So if it's a loose, slippy fabric, or if it's a very stiff fabric, to kind of go for something that's similar. And I guess is that you might have something in your you might have a skirt made out of a similar fabric that you really like the pattern of, but you don't wear it because of the shape or something like that. So that's the whole idea of this, looking at those pieces in your wardrobe and seeing that you could actually use them and that they are worth something and shouldn't be thrown in the bin. So now I've gotten as far as I can with that, and because, like I said, it's a 3D item, there's a certain amount that I can't actually reach without unpinning some of it here. Now I see. I need to unpin any of it down here. I think I'm good actually. That comes more into play when you're doing the frill. So I'll show you that when I get there. So I'm going to draw the neckline in. And I'm going to mark where the shoulder seam is there. And I'm going to pin the shoulder seam here, right in the corner. Again, being careful not to pull it out of shape. This is particularly when something's cut on a curve, because the feature that I was explaining before, the bias comes into play because it's curving, and at certain points it will stretch more than others. So you need to be careful that it doesn't pull out of place, give you the wrong shape. So I'm just going to continue at the back here, up to the side, the shoulder seam. And I'm going to mark the corner of the shoulder seam, and we can join them up. And I will take off the pins now because I have my pattern created for that center panel. So I'll show you. Yeah. Where's my set? So I'll just join up the shoulder seam line. And I might just hold this up so you can see it with the. You see that? It's important when you do this to actually write on your pattern what it is. So this is the center front panel. And this is the center front line here. This one here. And I'm going to mark that with. So on a commercial pattern, the fold, if there's a line, it's marked like this. So you can see there's two arrows and a line with two corners. That is how you denote a fold line. And you would write on this also, cut one on fold. Because you'll be surprised, even though you think you will never ever forget this, you'll be surprised you come back to it in a week's time and you'll be like, oh, what does this all mean? What are these pieces? So it's a really good idea to mark them as you go. So this isn't quite finished yet. What I do need to do is mark the seam allowance on. So I am going to mark 1.5 centimeter seam allowance on. That's the standard seam allowance that's included in a commercial pattern. You can decide if you have less fabric to add just 1 centimeter, but just make sure you add the same amount to each pattern piece. So I'm using my measuring tape to make marks that are 1.5 centimeters. So you do this the whole way around, and you would do this for each panel piece. This will be easier. If you do have something that is just a straight line, so like this shoulder seam is just a straight line, you can just mark it at either end and join it up with a ruler. Because the center line is going to be placed on the fold of your fabric, we don't need to add a seam allowance there. And then, we need to do the neckline as well. Then we're going to join up those lines, those marks that we made. And you may need a ruler or your measuring tape to help you a little bit. So the measuring tapes are really good because they do have a certain amount of curve. And you can join them up with a ruler also, and then just put the curve in yourself by eye if that's easier for you. So just curve those points. So then you have your pattern piece, and you would cut around your seam allowance there. So I'll just show you. There's one other thing I want to show you just with regards to this, because there can be a certain, depending on the pattern pieces that you're trying to cut out, there can be a certain amount of maneuvering that you'll need to do in order to be able to get the right pattern, or in order to be able to get your garment to sit flat without having to deconstruct it. So that's the whole beauty of this method, is that you don't actually need to take your piece apart. You can continue wearing it. So here. You might find actually that before you cut your actual pieces out, it's a good idea to trace them all first, and then you may need to adjust them slightly. So you may find that your side seams aren't exactly lining up, and you might need to alter one of them a little bit, just in terms of like changing the curve of a line. There we go. There's our pattern piece. So we go back to our top. And that was our front pattern piece. Something that is important to mark on this is actually where the frill begins. So I'm going to mark that on there. So I'm going to line this up. So remembering that I want to put the outline along the stitch line. So my frill starts there. So I want to mark that on. So that when I'm sewing them together, I know that the frill has to start there. Cool. And I actually realized as I was doing that in my haste, I didn't add enough down the bottom here for the hem. So that's something to remember. I should have added an extra centimeter there. So it should have been 2.5 centimeters left there at the bottom for the bottom hem. If I was going to make this up now, I'd make another pattern, or I would just simply note it on the pattern piece and add it when I was cutting it. So I want to show you the other piece of paper. Just the frill, because it shows a certain technique that you need to use sometimes, depending on what garment you're trying to copy. So the frill is actually a kind of circular curved shape that's cut out, and will be a little bit tricky to pin because there's a certain amount of movement in it. So I need to kind of I don't want to put it all over this side. I need to do both sides as I go along to make sure I'm keeping the right shape. So I'm going to do there and here. So I might show you on this one the idea of the bias and the straight of grain. So if you look at the close-up, at certain points when I stretch this, it's a bit, it stretches, and at certain points it doesn't. So you can feel it stretching or not. And at the point that it doesn't, that direction between my two fingers is the straight of grain. So that's something for this piece that we will need to mark onto our pattern piece so that we can cut out the frill in the other fabric in the same way. So far, so good. It's looking good. I'm happy with that. Has anyone tried a project like this before? Obviously, with it, something simple. It's an easy enough thing to do, like with a T-shirt that just has a front and a back. As long as you had a similar type of fabric, it would be easy enough. So when I get to this point, this is all sitting nice and flat here. But when I kind of get to here, it's as far as it goes. I can't get this to sit flat anymore. So what I need to do in this case is trace this out. So trace around the edge here. And the same on the inside. So just move this around so it's a bit easier to get into. You can see what I'm doing. So I'm just folding it back to the stitch line here. So the seam line. So again, just tracing out the outline of the shape. As far as it will go. Okay, so that's as far as it will go. And then what I'm going to need to do is unpin the top here. So once you've got it traced, you need to unpin it slightly, not all the way, but just the top here. So I'm going to leave the center bit here pinned, and that's going to free this up down here so that I can pin this flat. Because that's really where you can see that you're trying to transfer a 3D shape onto a 2D piece of paper. And you just might need to do it bit by bit because it's been stitched together. If you're very sure that you don't want to wear your garment anymore, you can to unpick it. So unpick all of the seams and use the actual pieces, separated pieces, to make your patterns. But if you do want to keep on wearing it, this is the best way to do it. So again, I'm going to take out some of the pins, but not all of them. And I'm going to lay this flat. Again, doing it bit by bit, going on the outside and on the inside so that I'm not putting it all one direction, making sure that it's sitting nice and flat.
Arran, can I butt in with a question there?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, a while ago, Catherine asked any tips for doing this with a pair of trousers, particularly with working with difficult shaped seams like a crotch seam.
It's kind of a similar idea. So this is something that you might need to do with the crotch seam. A good idea is to maybe look at it if you have a pattern, first of all, so you have an idea of the type of shape that you're trying to get, because a trouser will have a certain shape like that. You can't see what I've drawn, but it has a curved line on it. But this method, so you're basically trying to isolate each pattern piece bit by bit. This method will help you do that. If you get your side seam first, and then and your top, and then as far down on the crotch seam as you can, and then you might need to free up the bottom of your jeans in order to be able to pin the crotch down flat. So kind of similar method to this, I think. But having an idea of the type of shape that you're trying to get is always helpful. So I need to take out a few more of these seams. So we're nearing the end now. Of the curve and also of the masterclass. So if anyone has any further questions that you'd like to ask me, or anything, any tips even that you've come across for the other viewers or anything like that? Okay, I'm just trying to get in at the seam line. There is another method that you can use, a tracing wheel, or punch holes through with a pin. So instead of trying to fold your fabric back to get your line, you would actually go along your seam line with a pin and punch the holes in like this. Or you could use a tracing wheel to follow it around, but that would be hard to make sure it was exact, I found. Let's see this one.
Hey, Arran.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you have time for this, but Angela just said she asked, would you could show us marking in the direction of the bias for the frill part of the pattern?
Yes. Okay. Right. So, how can I do? What's the best way to show you that? So I'll lift this up. So this is the other frill. And this is cut on a curve. So there's going to be certain parts of this that are on the straight of grain, and then it's going to curve round into the bias. So, like I was saying, if you think about the way that a fabric is constructed, it's woven, unless it's a stretch fabric, in which case it's knitted to give it the stretch. But a non-stretch fabric is woven. So it has a straight of grain. So straight threads, the vertical threads going down the whole roll of fabric, they're all called the straight of grain. That's the direction of the straight of grain. So each of those lines, each of those threads is going to be on the straight of grain. The straight of grain is crossing over with the weft. I get this confused sometimes. So there's the warp and the weft of the woven, the weaving. So that if you find the straight of grain on a fabric, so if you are working just from a roll of fabric, it's easy to see because it's every line that's parallel to the edge of the fabric is going to be on the straight of grain. But if you have a piece of fabric like this, one way to have a look and see where it is that, so if you want to go to the close-up, when you pull it, it doesn't stretch at all. So if I change that to on the bias, you'll see it pulls and it stretches a little bit. So when it's right on the bias, that's why there's a give in it. So you need to play around with your fabric a little bit to see. Go back to my pinned frill here, and I'm going to have a look at how it moves when I pull it tight between my fingers. So I can see that somewhere. Can see that there at that point it is not stretching at all. So anything that's in that direction, I'll get my ruler and lay it down. So when I move either side of that position, it's stretching a little bit. In that position, so I'm going to put it right up to the ruler and position the ruler to correspond to the way that I'm stretching it. So there. So then I can draw that line there and I can draw it down here as well on the outside. And when I take up my fabric, I can mark it onto the pattern piece. And a straight of grain line on a commercial pattern, the standard notation is a straight line with an arrow at the top and at the bottom. And sometimes when you're making your own patterns, you would mark it with an S as well. So that will show you the direction you need to lay down your pattern piece on your fabric, on your new fabric. Does that help? So I want to just finish this little curve, take off the top so I can show you the pattern piece that I have created. You might have experienced the bias and the straight of grain coming into play without knowing it. I know I did when I was starting off sewing. I didn't pay much attention to it because it didn't really make much sense to me when I heard about it first. And I cut out something that I wanted to hang straight. And no matter what way I sewed it together, it just wouldn't hang straight. And it was because I'd actually cut it on the bias and it wasn't ever going to be able to hang straight because of that. So I'm just going to join this part up. I missed this part. Just be careful of that. And you might find that, like I'm looking at this piece here and it's a little bit straight. So you might find that you want to rework a few elements. A bit up here. Can you see that? Yeah. So that is the pattern for my fence. You would want to mark on it as well which end is in the front and which end is in the back part of your top. So that would be something to mark. This way. Another important thing to mark on this as well is where it meets the shoulder seam. So that will be an important notch for us to put in. So it's here. So this is the back. So back and front. And then we'll need to add our seam allowance onto that one as well. So it's quite a process. But once you have your pattern made, you can remake that top or that trousers or that anything again and again and again. Thus changing the fashion industry one garment at a time. So I think we're just at the end of the session now. So apologies again for the technical difficulties. The joys of it all, as I'm sure we're all acquainted with at this stage. But thank you very much for joining me. I hope that was helpful to you and hopefully inspired some projects and made things a bit more accessible possibly, or explained things to you a bit more. Every reuse project and every step we take to change our behavior towards our waste and our resources is worthwhile. And thank you very much for joining us for Reuse Month, and best of luck with your projects.
Thanks very much, Arran, and thanks everybody for tuning in today and sticking with us. And apologies once again for the technical difficulties at the beginning. The times you rehearse something, Wi-Fi and technology will always let you down. But what won't let you down is Arran. Arran's advice will always stay strong. forever. And thanks very much, Arran, for some great advice and tips. And it's some great chat as well among everybody. And you can see all the thank yous are popping up on the screen there now. So thanks very much for your input and your feedback. And thanks for all the great ideas as well. There was some fantastic ideas. Yeah, you missed some of it, Arran. I didn't want to interrupt you because you're during your flow, but the guys were talking among themselves there in the chat, sharing some great ideas and looking for inspiration. So yeah, look, that's the end of it now. I hope everybody's able to tune in next week. This time next week, we're going to be doing from Copper Creations. It's going to be showing us how to turn an old bottle into a lamp. And then the following week, Marianne for Revamp Tramp is going to be showing us is going to be doing a furniture revamp masterclass with us. So 2 more masterclasses to come over the next weeks, and a lot more to see and do on mywaste.ie. So thanks to the team, Waste Region, and for hosting this today, and thanks to the mywaste.ie team as well. So that's it for today. So thanks for your time, Arran, and thanks everybody for taking part.
See you again soon.